How's everybody doing? So, one of the things we're going to touch on today, and this is not something that I intend for you to repeat, it's simply an instruction so that you can see what we're doing, what I'm doing. We're going to talk about throwing, right? That was one of the techniques we were going to study this semester. So, we're going to go ahead and study it. Okay, so one of the things you have to have when you throw is you have to have a wheel. That's what I've got right here. It's a Brent. I like Brent. Works just fine. I like Shimpo too. Um, and you'll need clay, right? So I've got my clay ball here. This is about 3 pounds. And I like to knock it about until it's about like a Hershey's Kiss, right? I don't like it to be fully round. I know a lot of potters like their clay to be in a round ball. I actually don't like that. I like it to have sort of a teardrop shape. I think it works better. The first thing you have to do is you have to get it stuck on the wheel. Now, I do something a little different than most people. I actually have these lovely little square bats that I've had for years and years and years. And I like to put one down before I start throwing. And that does is that gives me just like a 1/4 inch worth of lift. That makes it easier for me to get the pot off the wheel. You'll see how I do that later. But I like to have just like a little small bat here. Just makes life a little easier later on, right? So I've got my little bat down. So you might hear it rattle. You might hear it like bounce. It's not. Hopefully, it's not going to bounce off. But yeah. So if you hear a little like rattle in the background, it's probably the bat, right? So the first thing I like to do is get that bat just slightly damp, just very lightly damp. And I'm going to start my wheel up, right? I'm going to take a mostly dry sponge and just take all that water off of it, just so that it looks like it has been wet. You don't want it to be wet, uh, but you want it to have been wet, if that makes sense. You don't want it bone dry. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to slam this clay down onto the wheel, and I'm going to aim for the very middle, right? I'm going to aim for the middle, so when I slam this down, it's going to stick, and it's going to alleviate a lot of the centering that I would normally have to do. If I can get it to start in the center, it actually makes it easier to go from there forward. So I'm just going to, right? And so that's a little off center, but it's not bad, right? And there we go. So we're going to get it started. You can see it's got a little bit of wobble to it. You see that? If I were to try to throw with this wobble, I wouldn't end up with a good pot. It would end up all over the place. I would have a hard time controlling it, right? So what I want to do is, the first thing I want to do is I want to actually push the clay around in such a manner that it gets rid of that wobble. It gets rid of the wobble side to side, and it gets rid of the wobble up and down, right? So that's the first thing we're going to do. And that process is called centering. Now, to center, you're going to draw it up, right? And you want to make more or less a trumpet shape, right? You want it to have that trumpet. You don't want it to be straight up and down. You just want a little bit of a trumpet shape, right? Be sure to use plenty of water, especially as you're starting out. And then we're going to center it down, right? And truth be told, it's going to take a couple of times. Sometimes, especially when I'm warming up, it takes me a couple of times. So don't worry, when we do get to this, if it's not coming to it easily, that's fine. It takes a minute sometimes, okay? You just want to draw it up and center it back down. And hopefully, every time you do this, it gets a little bit closer to center, Do it one more time. Your aim should be to get it centered within 3 draws, right? If you can get it centered within 3 draws, you're doing pretty good. Sometimes it might take 4, but if you're sitting here taking like 7, 8, 9, 10 draws, there's something up with your technique, or your clay's too hard. There's another issue, right? So it's not just that the clay. There may be something else going on, right? So now you'll notice here. Let me get the slip cleaned off here. There's still a little bit of wobble to it, not much, right? But we've got a little bit of wobble. Honestly, that's close enough for city work. If I was being really particular, I'd take it up one more time. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to take it up one more time just to make sure it stays nice and centered. So I can do this right here. Now, when I'm drawing up here, now that I've got it more or less how I want it, we're going to run through exactly what I'm doing. So when I'm drawing up, I am using basically the meaty part of my hand here, right? This part of my hand where the pinky muscle is, that's what I'm using. And I'm pinching that around the pot, right? Here and here. I'm not trying to scoop it quite like water, but that's sort of the motion. I'm sort of squeezing together and pulling up. And that gives me this nice sort of trumpet shape, right? It's kind of like a bell curve. Maybe not quite, but, right? So when I'm pulling up, I'm pinching it together like that. And you can even kind of see a little bit where the slip is building up on the palms of my hands. Now I'm not squeezing it like this with my forefinger and thumb. A lot of people think you got to wring its neck. That's not what you're doing, right? You're just drawing it up, right? It's like, I call it drawing because it's like drawing water from a stream, but you're just drawing it up. Not trying to pinch it though, just sort of draw it. Okay. Now when I'm pushing down, and this is one of the places where you run into a lot of variations amongst potters. This is the way I do it, and I would venture to say this is the correct way, but there are literally hundreds of correct ways, but this is the correct way. I take my left hand, that's the one that doesn't make the R, right? It's left hand. And I roll that thumb over, right? It's almost like I'm G.I. Joe and I've got a Kung Fu grip, right? I roll that thumb over and I set it right on top of this edge, right like that, right? So that I end up with slip. You can see the slip trailing where it's hitting. So the pot is sitting right here, right? And you can see where the slip is. That sits on top like that. Now, one of the things that you end up doing unconsciously that you need to avoid doing is letting this hand flatten out like that. If you let the hand flatten out like that, you've got a problem because there's nothing on the backside here to keep the clay from going that way, and it will go that way. As you're pushing down, the clay will pop out that way, and you'll wonder why you can't get it centered. It's because you're pushing like this, and you need to be pushing like this. All right? So the left hand sits here, right, with the thumb rolled over. I try to make the muscles as relaxed as I can, otherwise they get tired after a while. Right? So I just sort of let my thumb drape. The right hand locks behind that thumb, right? Locks behind the thumb. Not here, not up here, way back here, right? Look at how offset my hands are, right? They're not together. They're offset. I've got big old fingers. I understand that's a little bit different, but they are offset to where the base of this hand is hitting kind of in the palm of this hand. Right? See that? That's what you're shooting for. If they're side by side, you're off just a bit. All right? So forward, back, there you go. And you can see that they're off kilter, right? They're off kilter, they're offset. And now I'm going to push down with my left hand, and it's kind of like a clay balloon inflating, and I'm just resisting that inflation with my right hand just a little bit. I'm not pushing back, but I am resisting the inflation. And what that does is that forces the clay to hold into the center. Now, I got dry on because I was talking. Imagine that, me talking. All right? But then once you get to the base, you just hold it there for a second. You push in and down at the same time, and you count to 3 as you slowly release. Looky there. That's centered. We can totally work with that. One of the mistakes that people often make is they get it centered, they get it here, and then they release all at once. And if you do that, you're going to knock it off center because you're alleviating all that pressure at one spot, and it's not getting a chance to work its way around the pot. I'll show you what that looks like. So like you're pushing, it's centered, all right, you got it, yeah, and then you let go real quick, and look at that, it's off kilter. So be sure when you let go that you let go nice and even, right? Nice and even. we'll say nice and even, right? I always say from the time you start to let go to the time that your hands are off the clay, give yourself about 3 seconds. Count it down, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and then you can be off the pot. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. There we go. You'll have much more luck doing it that way. All right. So that's centering. That's the first step. We have to center before we do anything else. If we try to skip ahead of centering, we'll never get anything after this. You have to center first. There's no shortcut. You can't Google it. You can't Wikipedia out of it. You have to center. If you do not center, nothing else will work. Period. If you think you can come by and do that better, then the last 20,000 years, this is something that the last 20,000 years potters have learned, is that you got to center first. If you don't center first, it's not going to matter. So don't think that it's okay. Every young potter thinks, well, I'll figure out a way to do it afterwards. No, doesn't work. Doesn't work. 20,000 years of potters have taught us that you have to center first. So center first. When it's centered, it should look like this. This is a little off center, but it's not bad. But you can see there's not a lot of wobble going this way, and there's not a lot of wobble going that way, right? So you see that? It's pretty consistent. That is what we're looking for. Centering is first. Centering is priority.